So before I introduce the speaker, I want to thank the hardworking staff. Actually, they're not here, but I want you to know that we have very hardworking staff in the law clinics, and Carol Lee Taylor and Rita Mendez worked really hard with the gazillion emails and getting the food and all the logistics for the event, including the reception. So if you see them, please thank them. Just some logistics. If you're in the room, how we're taking questions is going to be at the end of the talk. And we have some note cards, which I'll distribute in case you're shy and would prefer to write down your question, or if you just want to give your question, I'll repeat it so that everyone can hear what it was. And then if you're in the chat, hopefully I'll be monitoring the chat and we'll be able to get those questions too. There is a reception in the courtyard after this. If you registered and would like a wine ticket, our clinic staff has one under your name, so please see them, and also fill out a name tag. And third, in addition to just giving people a chance to have more casual conversation with our speaker, we're hoping that law students can meet and chat with those of you who are practicing immigration attorneys. And there are a few of you here. And so we have little stickers for you. You can pick your emoji of the day or put a star on it. And that way you identify yourself as an attorney, and please circulate. So law students, you should feel free to go up to the attorneys, introduce yourselves, and get to know the immigration lawyers in town. So now for our speaker. This is the second time in a year and a half that we have had the good fortune to hear from Iván Espinoza-Madrigal, who is the executive director of the Boston-based Lawyers for Civil Rights. This organization works with communities of color and immigrants to fight discrimination and foster equity through litigation, education, and economic development, economic empowerment. During the Trump era, Lawyers for Civil Rights filed the first lawsuits in the country to protect sanctuary cities, to save temporary protected status on behalf of Central Americans and Haitian immigrants, block immigration arrests in courthouses, and reunite kids who are separated from their parents at the border. During the pandemic, Lawyers for Civil Rights worked with community partners to secure the relief at a particular immigration detention facility of people who are at risk of infection and death. And after that successful case, the facility was shut down. Earlier this month, based on information gathered the last time that he was here, Lawyers for Civil Rights and also based on Freedom of Information Act requests that Lawyers for Civil Rights and the Florence Immigrant and Refugee Rights Project filed. The two organizations have recently filed suit against Customs and Border Patrol and Department of Homeland Security for failing to produce records on how humanitarian parole requests at the border are handled for people who are stuck at the Arizona-Mexico border. So just some brief background. Before he worked at Lawyers for Civil Rights, Mr. Espinoza-Madrigal was the legal director of the Center for HIV Law and Policy. And before that, he worked at Lambda Legal, where he developed an initiative to address the legal needs of LGBT and HIV affected people of color and low-income people. He also focused on marriage equality cases. Before that, he handled the immigrants' rights docket for Mexican American Legal Defense and Education Fund. And today, he is going to talk about the Martha's Vineyard litigation primarily, but also other current issues in the area of immigration and immigrants' rights. And we are delighted to see you again. Welcome back, and please join me in welcoming Iván Espinoza-Madrigal.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Professor Marcus. It is always a pleasure to see you. And it is wonderful to be here. Thank you to the University of Arizona College of Law for inviting me here today. And I want to thank also, like you did, Carol Lee and Rena for doing all of that amazing work behind the scenes. And as you can see, we were also trying to figure out some of the internet logistics today. So I hope that all of that worked out okay. And I see at least 12 participants on Zoom. So I hope that it's going okay for you guys. And I can take a look at the Q&A every once in a while to make sure that we don't forget about you guys in the digital world. It is a pleasure to be here to see friends, so many friends from the Florence Project and from the faculty. And today I'm going to talk a little bit about our Martha's Vineyard case in particular, and then we'll open it up to a Q&A moderated by Professor Marcus. So I'm going to start where our client started, which is to say, imagine this. Imagine you are living in Venezuela, a country that the Department of State, that the federal government has said is essentially a dictatorship. It's a dictatorship. So much so that we do not have diplomatic or commercial relationships with Venezuela. You can't really effectuate the removal of a Venezuelan back to Caracas, for example. There's just no transportation between the US and Caracas for a host of political and diplomatic issues that really are at the heart of why many of the people that we represent came to the United States. Imagine that you live in Caracas and you have a family to feed, you have kids, and you're also active in the anti-government movement, and you sometimes attend different political activities in your community, and you start seeing that increasingly people are surveilling you, that people are following you, that there are people outside of your home, that your movement is being tracked, and that your family's movements are being tracked, including the activities of your children. Imagine that it's also, as you're dealing with all of this political nightmare and all of that type of oppression and silencing and the specter of violence, that you're also struggling to make ends meet because the Venezuelan economy has collapsed. And there are very few opportunities to be able to find even basic things like medicine. And so you worry about the well-being of your family, especially your kids, and how you're going to deal with not just an increasingly hostile political climate, but the increasingly repressive economic policies. And you decide, even with your 2-year-old in tow, that it is better for you to leave than to remain. It is safer for you to journey to the United States on foot, traveling through Venezuela, Colombia, the Darien Gap, on foot, the middle of the jungle. Reports show that at least 1 out of every 10 people that go into the forest do not make it out. I mean, that is a high likelihood, especially for families that are bringing children. You know, a little child can easily be swept away by the current in a river in the jungle. I mean, just basic things like that that you have to worry about, let alone, you know, snake bites or running into a cartel that's smuggling drugs through the jungle. And all of these things are the things that you have to journey through with your 2-year-old kid. And you get into the jungle and make it out in one piece, despite the threat of extortion, kidnapping, rape, and the other dangers that I described. You make it to the other side, you get to a Red Cross station where they provide you with immediate support, and you decide to continue going. You've made it through the jungle. What lies ahead can't be as bad as what you just survived. And you go through all of Central America, crossing border to border on foot. No easy task for a family with no resources. Most of our clients have no relatives in the United States, family or friends, to be able to finance the journey. And so you're just making it through, chugging along, even as you are experiencing extortion at each border crossing, even as each time you encounter an immigration official or law enforcement official, they're extorting you to be able to let you go and continue in your journey. And many times you're not even that lucky. One of our clients, for example, was kidnapped as he was approaching the US border on the Mexican side. And they assumed that he had family in the United States and said, call someone to pay your ransom. And he kept saying, I have no family, I have no friends, I have no one to call. And they kept pulling a tooth every time he refused to provide a phone number with a set of pliers, rendering him toothless, and then throwing him off the back of a moving vehicle in a corner left for dead. He made it to Martha's Vineyard through this fiasco that I'm about to talk about. These stories are not just hypothetical. These are the lived experiences of our clients. When they approached the US border, they immediately surrendered themselves to immigration officials. They did what they're supposed to do. Surrender yourself and request immigration protection and relief. Our clients, uniformly all, talked about how they needed to come to the United States. Many of them immediately requested asylum, describing their political experiences, their persecution in Venezuela, describing different conditions that they were fleeing from, the different experiences that they had survived. And after surrendering yourself to immigration with your family, they let you go with some documents that say that you have humanitarian parole. It's a blue stamp, it's in your immigration documents that you were released with. And once you get released, you're told you're free to go. You just go. They have nowhere to go. They have no family. They have no friends. They have no one to call. They instinctively just end up at a migrant resource center in San Antonio, Texas, where they're immediately told that they have an expiration date, 3 days. That's all you're allowed to stay here. You know, you're going to be okay for 3 nights. You sleep here. You can shower here. We give you access to shoes, clothing, and all of your other basic necessities. But on day 3, you're out. Immediately panic ensues. What am I supposed to do? Where am I supposed to go? Who am I supposed to call? I know no one here. And then all of a sudden, and you have kids. Remember, there's a kid. And all of a sudden, as you are, in the middle of processing all of this, how you've come into the United States, the trauma of the journey, what you left behind in Venezuela, and all of that struggle, and then you all of a sudden see that there's somebody who approaches you saying, I can give you a McDonald's gift card so that you can eat. And I see that your kids need shoes, and I can get them shoes. So all of a sudden, they start reeling you in with gifts and with basic things like a burger because you're hungry, like shoes because your kid hasn't had sneakers that properly fit him or her since you probably left Venezuela. And in this climate of intense vulnerability, where you have nowhere to go, nowhere to turn to, that seems like a good Samaritan to you. And the person even speaks your language. The person then starts telling you, Perla is her name. She was recruiting the migrants, starts telling you, we can provide even more support. We can help you get housing, get a job, get immigration assistance, enroll your kids in school, connect you to medical care, and give you free English classes. Who wouldn't sign up for that? Isn't that what you left looking for? Isn't that what anybody would want after a precarious 3-month journey on foot through all of Central America? And some of our clients were kidnapped. Some of our clients were tortured. I mean, this is the reality of the group. And then they say to you, but this is a special flight. It's a special flight, and you need to be approved. You need to qualify to be able to go. We need to see all of your immigration papers and your passport. Pass it over. Oh, you have kids, you have a family, even better. Pass over your documents. We need to make sure you're eligible. They knew when they were recruiting our clients that they all had permission to be in the United States through humanitarian parole. They knew when they were recruiting our clients that they were Venezuelan. This was no coincidence. It was deliberately orchestrated, deliberately schemed at that level of asking people to turn over their documentation before they were deemed eligible for the plane. Good news for you. You and your family can get on the plane. But the plane leaves in 5 days, or 3 days, however long it took to recruit the rest of the people to fill up 2 planes. 49 people, including the children. And you ask, in the process of being told all of these wonderful things, that you're now eligible to get on this plane, that you're going to get all these wonderful things on the other side. You ask questions because, after all, you made it to the United States on foot. Like, you've had to watch your back. You've had to be at the top of your game and at the top of your senses. And you ask probing questions. Who's funding this? What church are you affiliated with? Because en route, you get used to oftentimes having shelters run by the church or by religious groups. And so the idea of having a church support you is not foreign, something that you made it through different shelters from Venezuela to the United States by relying oftentimes on Good Samaritans, relying oftentimes on shelters, on churches. So you ask, what church? Who's behind this effort? Where am I going? Who will receive me? Who will pick me up? And they told me that this immigration paper that I got the other day, see here, it says I have to check in on Monday, and it's Wednesday. And so how am I going to check in San Antonio? You're going to put me on a plane, and where am I going then? And they're like, don't you worry about any of those things. Those things are going to be addressed as soon as you get to the other place. Don't you worry. Deadlines with immigration, check-in appointments, hearings, don't you worry. On the other side, you'll have immigration assistance, free immigration assistance. And the answers are always very vague. It's just, people who want to support the immigrants and get them to sanctuary jurisdictions, get them to sanctuary cities. That's who's behind this. That's where you're going. You're going to a sanctuary city, New York, Boston, Massachusetts, DC. We'll let you know more as we go. All of a sudden, they say, planes are ready, we have to go. And they tell you, to get on the plane, you have to sign some type of document. The document's in English. And you ask for it in Spanish. And the document isn't properly translated. It's not grammatically correct. It's much shorter than the English version. And if anybody's done Spanish translation, they know in Spanish we talk a lot. So the fact that it's short, suspicious. And then they get told you cannot get on the plane unless you sign the document. And there's still all of this, like shepherding them, herding them, each step of the way. One deceit built in another, one lie built on another. They got on the planes, and the planes leave San Antonio, stop in Florida to put gas and a change of crew. Welcome, we won't hold it against you. I'm a lawyer. You're a busy lawyer. And then they make a second stop, also for refueling or plane crew changes, things like that. And eventually, they get told, okay, plans have changed. You are now going to Martha's Vineyard. Panic ensues as people are like, where am I going? What's happening? Where is this? Martha's Vineyard. It's an island. You're going to be fine. And they're like, what do you mean it's an island? How do we get to the mainland? Who's going to be there for us? What happens on this island? How are we going to get out of the island? Who helps us? This and that. Panic ensues. People start freaking out. Families start crying. Children start crying. Plane lands. And the families find themselves in the middle of Martha's Vineyard, which, as some of you may know, or maybe some of you have been there, it's basically a tourist resort. So imagine like a very large Mirabelle or Canyon Ranch, and you're just dropped off in the middle of it. And there's really no one to receive you because there's no infrastructure or anything in Martha's Vineyard. Really luxury tourism. So they're not set up with the type of infrastructure that you would get in Boston, for example, where you would be able to find a shelter, a soup kitchen, a nonprofit organization to help guide you and support your efforts, whether it's on the humanitarian front or whether it's in the immigration front. I mean, the infrastructure is extremely limited because it's set up as a tourist destination. And that was the intent. The intent was to destabilize these people, to make them go through the most difficult process ever to be rescued. And when people land, they eventually make their way to a small social services organization that runs out of Martha's Vineyard. Bless their heart, the amount of work that they put in after the planes arrived. And they're clearly in distress. There are sick people in the crowd. Some people need to be rushed to the hospital. And mothers are concerned that their kids don't have a place to sleep. There's nobody who is expecting you. Nobody who has shown up offering you what you were told you were going to receive. It's clear from the moment they get told that the plane is going to land in Martha's Vineyard because there's been a change in plan, it's clear that they've been duped. That becomes clearer and clearer each step of the way after the plane lands, after there's nobody to go to, nobody to give them shelter, nobody to give them food. And that's when all of this unfolds. And then the next few hours, there are newspaper articles starting to run about how 2 plane loads of migrants have arrived at Martha's Vineyard unannounced, with no arrangements made ahead of time, and that the migrants have nowhere to go. And so the community, the Martha's Vineyard community, which is a small community, it's a small island, gets together to start supporting the migrants, collects them in a local church where they start bringing food, bringing cots, and bringing other supplies that they need so that at least they can have a place to stay. And that is the experience of our clients. That is how 49 people went from San Antonio to Martha's Vineyard, and immediately afterwards, Governor DeSantis of Florida takes full credit for it, completely proud of the fact that these families had been duped and deceived in their most vulnerable moments and actually placed in harm's way, endangered families with children as young as 2 years old because there was nobody waiting for them on the vineyard. We arrived on the vineyard the following morning because as soon as the migrants arrived, their floats started just blowing up. Everybody was like, we don't know what to do with them. We don't know what they need. We don't even have enough people who speak Spanish to be able to communicate. That's even a whole thing. So the first person to encounter the migrants were clearly in a state of distress. Tries to communicate with them, is an English speaker. None of them speak English, and so they couldn't communicate. She calls her friend over at the high school, which is just across the street, and the Spanish teacher comes and translates. And she calls the students from the Spanish class to come help with the translations. And that's how they first started getting connected to help. It was people from the community, kids from the local high school coming out to translate and to help with just the most basic of infrastructure building until people from the mainland were able to arrive. And when we arrived on the vineyard, it was complete mayhem, complete mayhem. Nobody had dealt with a humanitarian crisis of this sort. Nobody knew what to do with them. What do you tell to a mother with a 2-year-old who says, I came fleeing violence from Venezuela and they promised me housing and a job and an immigration status if I got on that plane? And the immigration paperwork I have says that I have to show up to an immigration hearing in San Antonio in 2 days. What do you tell that family? It was extraordinarily challenging to deal with a humanitarian crisis of this scope without resources on the Vineyard. My attorneys were out on the island that morning taking one of the ferries because there is no road to Martha's Vineyard. You can't drive. You have to either take a ferry or a plane. And as you can imagine, taking a plane to a luxury resort island, not cheap. And the ferries were also full because even though this happened in mid-September, it's still wedding season in the island. And so it's very difficult to find even places to stay, let alone a way to get on the island. So my team was able to make it in one of the few ferries that had remaining spots early that next morning and help with the setup of the triage so that we were helping families not just with, whose immigration hearings are coming up first and whose medical needs still need to be tended to, but also starting to gather the stories about how exactly this transpired. And quickly we start seeing the similarities. Everybody had to turn over their identity documents, their passport, their immigration paperwork, all of their humanitarian parole papers. People were told that if they had children, it was more advantageous for them and that they would benefit more if they got on the plane. How perverse is that? Just sick. And then they were all told very similar things. You will get housing, you'll guaranteed housing, you'll get guaranteed work, you'll get an immigration status. If you have kids, you'll get schooling. The promises were identical. Couple to couple, individual to individual, we started hearing like these really similar narratives, right? Like they were all told they were going to find some type of housing, some type of work, some type of immigration status. So the narratives very, very consistent. We start seeing the pattern of deception. We start seeing the pattern of the scheming and the conspiring to not just gather them and then herd them into the planes, but then just drop them off in Martha's Vineyard without regard to their fate. And within 3 days, we filed a federal class action against this, outlining a wide range of different constitutional claims, everything from equal protection, because their identity was very much an issue of their recruitment. So we've raised a host of equal protection claims, due process claims, preemption claims, because here state officials interfered in the orderly operation of federal immigration proceedings and tried to sabotage clients who had fast approaching immigration deadlines and cases. And then we've also raised a host of other more traditional state law claims like false imprisonment and intentional infliction of emotional distress. And so we have over a dozen claims, some constitutional in nature, and then some just quite practical in terms of intentional infliction of emotional distress against the state. And we subsequently amended the complaint to add the plane companies that transported the migrants, and also to add the recruiters that were on the ground in San Antonio, trolling the migrant center and making the promises and collecting people and offering the McDonald's gift cards and then sequestering people off-site. So they were removed from a migrant resource center even before their time was up. They were sequestered at a different site, actually on the outskirts of San Antonio, far from where any actual Good Samaritan would find them. So I mean, there was intentionality behind this. And so we've also alleged these claims against the recruiters who were on the ground, one of whom, Perla Huerta, is a former spy who was hired by the state of Florida to conduct the operation on the ground. And as I mentioned, some of the claims, some of the interesting claims also include civil conspiracy, because this is really a conspiracy to perpetrate the scheme for political gain, because DeSantis said that he had done this to make a political statement about immigration. And we also raised another, I think, really interesting claim around conspiracy to violate civil rights, because that's exactly what we have here is a deliberate attempt to violate the constitutional rights of our clients. And so it's a case of first impression, and we're litigating in a federal court in Boston. The state of Florida just moved to dismiss the lawsuit, which is typical in litigation, and we will be responding within the next couple of weeks to their motion to dismiss. The good thing is that in the moving papers, we saw nothing that we didn't, nothing crazy, nothing we weren't expecting. The state of Florida is also seeking to move the case to Florida, so it filed a motion to change venue, because DeSantis cannot be hauled into a Massachusetts court, but he surely hauled all of those 49 migrants into Massachusetts, purposefully availing himself of Massachusetts courts, venue, etc. So I think we have very strong claims on the motion to defeat the motion for the transfer. But that's in a nutshell, both the humanitarian elements of what we're dealing with and also the legal implications of what we're dealing with. And this dovetails really well with a lot of what many of the practitioners here in the room see, because you guys see the day-to-day immigration issues that the folks I was just describing. You guys are representing people like this. I have no doubt. This is not new for any of you. You know this better than I do. And it is, I think, that really interesting link between having people who had been processed by the feds, having been authorized to enter the country, and who were on a path to secure, whether it was asylum or other types of protection, who then get shipped across the country and deliberately sabotaged. So I think there's a really interesting nexus here between the lived experiences of our clients, the typical immigration process that you guys would expect and see, and the interference caused by DeSantis. And so, I want to voice that because I think that's a particularly apropos element for many of the people in the room. And with that, I'll shut up, because as you can see, I could talk forever. So I'll shut up, and I'm going to turn it to Professor Marcus so that Professor Marcus could lead us into a Q&A. And I can tell you there is no Q&A questions in the Zoom yet, but people should know I don't bite, I just sue. So please ask me questions, and I promise people that I'm not going to go Socratic as well. So
we do have attorneys who are not shy. So let's start with, is that Isenia then? You look so beautiful. Yeah.
So I was wondering, where is that Texas law enforcement kind of in all of this? Because I remember seeing like a couple of interviews of the sheriff, I believe, saying that he would issue like U visa certifications or T visa certifications for things. Where are they at?
And just to repeat the question, so the question is, what's the attitude or actions of law enforcement in Texas towards what happened? And are they, for example, issuing certifications for victims of crimes for a specific kind of visa called a U visa?
yeah, excellent question. And this is actually another one of these really interesting points. So in speaking with members of the immigration bar in San Antonio and Bexar County, many people said that they had actually experienced a lot of barriers to getting U visa certifications from the sheriff's office, that the sheriff wasn't exactly the most forthcoming with these things. And yet, when this Vineyard hit, right, this highly sympathetic pattern, highly sympathetic people who were preyed on in San Antonio, in the jurisdiction of the sheriff. And I have to say, just to paraphrase, basically, there was a lot of like, we can't allow other states to think that they can prey on immigrants in our jurisdiction, right? Like if they did this, who else will do this? Like what other state is going to come and grab immigrants from the alley behind the Migrant Resource Center because they have nowhere to go after the third day? Now, I was at the Migrant Resource Center shortly after we filed the lawsuit, just to get the lay of the land of how does this actually work. I mean, within minutes of being at the Migrant Resource Center, people come up to you. People are like, do you have? You know, I was with several women attorneys from my office, and a woman came up to one of my attorneys saying, you know, I'm out here because I'm waiting for somebody to drop off food. I need a bra that actually fits me. I mean, these are just the basic vulnerabilities and necessities that people have. This is how preying on them is so easy. You know, and somebody asked me, well, you know, they got duped, it's on them. And I thought about that, and I'm like, you're talking about a group of such highly vulnerable people, people who are fleeing persecution, in some cases torture, and many other circumstances, right? Because much of this is very high level. I'm not going into the specifics of every single case, right? But these are people who are coming from a state of intense vulnerability. They are right here seeking refuge because they're fleeing what state actors did to them in Venezuela. And then all of a sudden, they realized that it was a state actor that did this to them in the United States. Could you imagine the whiplash, like the trauma, like the idea of like, I fled state oppression and here it was a governor who put me on that plane? That's a reality that our clients face every day. And so the idea that we cannot be preying on the most vulnerable is particularly compelling. And I'm glad that law enforcement felt that way too. And so the Bexar County Sheriff did issue visa certifications to each of the migrants. And so that has opened up an avenue of immigration protection and relief in addition to the asylum claims that many of them had already been thinking about or already pursuing or already starting to pursue based on what they even started talking about at the border. They were coming in. This is why I'm here. This is why I'm fleeing. And so that was a really great thing. And then the immigration bar in San Antonio said, you've issued it, you created a precedent. Now we're going to be knocking on your door for your visa certifications for our clients. And so that was really a terrific win for both the San Antonio bar and then for our clients. And so, yes, that the U visa question, yes, we were able to secure the U visa certifications. And I think the other really nice kind of like immediate impact that I would point to is the deterrent effect. After we filed the lawsuit, and we filed it very quickly, precisely to create the deterrent effect, there were flights that were organized to go, for example, to Biden's house in Delaware. And we were told that those flights got canceled. And there were actually records of those flights getting canceled and immigrants that had been rounded up in San Antonio in similar fashion who were released from the motel where they had been sequestered because they were no longer going to get on the flights. And so there was an immediate deterrent effect. That same time, not only with the Biden situation, with the Delaware situation, but we were receiving phone calls from Napa, Sonoma, Palm Springs, and other destinations, other vacation destinations from the country saying that they understood that flights were scheduled or planned to drop off immigrants in those localities. And as you can imagine, much like the Vineyard, it is not easy to mobilize a pro bono or humanitarian relief effort in Palm Springs, and it's not easy to do it in Sonoma. Good for wine, not so good for pro bono infrastructure. And so, you know, the deterrent effect was quite tangible. And so I'm glad that we've been able to do pieces like the U visa, which have opened up pathways of opportunity for our clients, but also for others who may need them. And then the deterrent effect is, I think, another very concrete win that I would point to. And of course, you know, we brought the case because there's a there there. And so we hope that we will ultimately be able to get injunctive relief as well, so that the injunctive relief will obviously be against DeSantis, but will be able, I hope, to create a deterrent effect against other states continuing in this fashion. And since Martha's Vineyard, we haven't seen it repeated. So that's a win.
And we have a question from Rachel, who is also a private attorney in town.
I have two questions, actually. I have so many questions, but two rose to the top. One, federal law enforcement, and not just for your visa certification purposes, but this is clearly a crime. Texas sees it as a crime. Is there just no political will to prosecute these people? That's one question. My other question is DeSantis and his people, are they even trying to assert immunity? Because how on earth could you claim that this is part of your office to take people from a whole other state and send them to Massachusetts?
Would you like to repeat the questions or?
Yes, sure. The question was, is there any political will for criminal prosecution? And then the second question was about sovereign immunity or other immunities that may be asserted by the state.
And on a political will, choose specifically asking the federal government's political will.
Yeah, the politics of this is really complicated and something that, as a litigator, I try to stay away from because, I do impact litigation. I am not a politician by any means. And so the politics is thorny, right? Some people ask me, well, why Venezuelans? Like, wouldn't that actually hurt politically because of the strong Venezuelan community in Florida? And truth be told, that in and of itself was very deliberate and very political. There are strong narratives in some Latino circles that the people who are coming across the border now are dangerous, that the people coming across the border now have ties to gangs, that especially people coming now from Venezuela are all infiltrators from the dictatorship and that they cannot be trusted, and that the collapse of the state of Venezuela means that the government is emptying jails and sending those people here and Gutshoes and Martha's Vineyard. And so there's a lot of this in the background. And so the politics is complicated because the fact that this happened to these immigrants of this nationality actually plays very well in some political circles, including within Latino political circles, and especially in Florida political circles. And so the politics is super complicated. And I'm barely scratching the surface. And then there's not just the state politics, but the federal politics, as Professor Marcus was commenting on. My sense is that the federal government will not step in because immigration is like the third rail right now. And politically, the administration considers it to be too controversial. It's going to be a no-win for people who are conservative and even for some liberals who are against open borders and the surge that's happening at the border and how we need to be tougher with these people, not encouraging it, which obviously I'm just describing some of the arguments that I'm hearing, not that I espouse any of these views, but that is a prevailing political strand as well. And so we're fighting against a political strand that says that the Venezuelan criminals are at the border. We're fighting another political strand that says that immigration will cost us elections. And so we're fighting political strands at every level, based on identity politics, based on just the themes. And so it's tough. I do not think we will see a criminal prosecution. And maybe I'm wrong, and if I am, I would love to be wrong, but you just never know. But my sense is that if there would have been one, we would have seen one by now. And my sense is also that if the feds had cared more about it, that they would have taken some type of action. Our federal lawsuit, for example, includes preemption claim, which our clients have standing to bring for a host of issues related to the facts I described. But the federal government also has standing for that. And the fact that they haven't asserted it is concerning. It's concerning. It's kind of leaving out there the option unless we close that loop in court. And so the point is that I'm not seeing, whether it's criminal or civil, much more activity. Our lawsuit remains basically the primary vehicle out there. And yes, to get more technical, what the state is saying is that it is entitled to a wide set of immunities. The state is saying that it basically intercepted immigrants that would have ended up in Florida, and that it is its right to not have these people in Florida. It's kind of like a weird thing to try to argue. Many years ago, I worked in the Arizona SB 1070 case, the Show Me Your Papers case here in Arizona, where the feds did come in and among other nonprofit organizations and said, this is a preemption issue, you cannot do this, right? And so I'm kind of seeing this in that strand of cases in a way, even though this is an unprecedented situation, very different, but similar in some respects. But I think the immunity argument, or the idea that the state is protecting itself from the immigration search, is not really a legally viable remedy here for them. I think they will lose. I think it's a losing proposition, but obviously they are raising a wide range of different immunities, which is a difficult thing also. It's like, even if the state doesn't have permission to do this, well, I did it in my personal capacity, and so then you're liable there. And they're like, no, I'm not liable in my personal capacity because I'm wearing my state hat. And I'm like, well, you either have to be liable as a state actor or you're liable personally. And I'm suing you in both capacities. So one has to give. But this idea of like the finger pointing is already kind of starting, like this idea of like, which hat am I wearing? And then the other really interesting strand that's starting to emerge is like, oh, we didn't know what was happening, and it was that spy running around amok, out of control. Not with us, just a spy on her own, just running around. And so there's this idea that you have the person who's doing this on the ground, and somehow you have no idea about what they're doing. It's kind of crazy to me. And is born out to be false based on all the evidence we already have, and we haven't even entered discovery. I mean, it's been so high profile that investigative reporting has happened extensively. And so we found out Perla was a spy through the New York Times investigative reporting. We found out other elements through the Miami Herald's investigative reporting, right? So there's already been a lot of digging that even before we get to discovery, even before we get to a deposition, we have all these facts. And so we've seen communication from the state to people on the ground. And so this is not somebody going rogue and screening immigrants for this deception without being told to do it from above.
You have another question. You have a question from the chat from Ellen Sternstein, who asked, you mentioned.
Yeah.
Oh, there you go. You mentioned seeking injunctive relief. Did you seek a preliminary injunction in any of your cases? And then I'm also gonna take the prerogative here, piggyback on a totally unrelated question, which is, how is it that your organization is able to turn on a dime? You've got a lot of litigation going on. How is it that you find this out at, whatever in the afternoon, and everybody's on a ferry the next day? Like, how can you function like this as an organization?
It's tough, but I'll take Alan's question, and then I'll take Professor Marcus's question. So we are certainly seeking the PI. The PI is the heart of the relief that we seek, and we did not file it on an emergency basis because of a wide range of things. But the preliminary, or I should say the injunctive relief is what we're seeking, right? The injunctive relief is what we're seeking. And so no PI in the case, but the injunction is the goal. And so for a wide range of strategic reasons, Alan, we did not do the PI. But of course, I think it dovetails nicely, but we would turn on a dime and file a PI if we need to, right? If we see another movement of this type, we would seek emergency relief. And so I think it dovetails nicely to your question. And it's hard. I mean, it is hard. That evening, my phone was blowing off the hook, and I think I went to bed around I lost track, maybe around 2 a.m. I set my alarm for 6 a.m. And by 7 a.m., we were talking with the state, we were talking with, the priest at the church where they were staying, right? And these are people that I normally don't know or talk to, but when an emergency happens, the community, right, it takes a village. And so somebody reached out to me saying, do you know the church? And I'm like, I don't know the church. I don't know the church of Martha's Vineyard. I don't go to Martha's Vineyard. And then they said, this is the priest and this is the cell phone. And I was like, okay, I'll take it, right? Like, I'll take it. And I called and, and I just randomly called. And I'm like, this is Iván Espinoza calling from Lawyers for Civil Rights in Boston. We're attorneys. We provide work for free. We are en route to the island. My attorneys are heading to your church. Will you be there to receive them? Who should they ask for? Right? And just like, that's the way it started. And once we got to the island, I mean, we were basically coordinating it and running it, but in all of the lead up was a lot of folks reaching out to us saying, did you see this? What are you doing about it? Did you see this? What are we going to do? Did you see this? And do you know that no one in Martha's Vineyard has the capacity to help? Or, the only nonprofit on the island is staffed by like one person, and they're not going to know what to do. So there was a lot of frankly, a lot of pressure to just get out there immediately. And so, I mean, we were going to that, but it became clear, even within a matter of hours, that people were looking to us for the plan of attack. Like, how are we going to tackle this? And so it was tough. It was tough because you don't have necessarily a playbook, right? It's not like, oh, I'm going to do the same thing that happened last time migrants arrived in Martha's Vineyard. You don't have it. And so you kind of just have to go and do it, right? And when we showed up, the first thing we did was just start interviewing people and saying, tell me what happened to you, how you got here, and show me any papers that you have. And that's how it started.
We have about, I don't know, 3.5 minutes, and we did put on the title. You're going to talk about other stuff.
Okay, other stuff.
I don't know if maybe you want to say a little bit about the humanitarian parole.
Yes, because the Florence Project has been instrumental in that. And actually, that is a nice closing point. So I came to the law school about 1.5 years ago. I reached out to Professor Marcus to say that I was really curious about what was happening at the border, and that we see some of it in Boston, but that I wanted to see it in person. And at that point, I hadn't been to the border, which is kind of crazy because I do a lot of immigration work, maybe not day-to-day immigration work in the way that you warriors do, but I think a lot about the impact litigation pieces, especially the Trump litigation that we did, for example, to preserve TPS and things like that. And so I came down to the border on the invitation of Professor Marcus, and I met up with the Florence Project. Actually, the Florence Project took me to Mexico. They basically smuggled me out, smuggled me back in, and it was just fabulous. And the Florence Project was lovely. I mean, just amazing, amazing people who, basically they take strays because they were just like, sure, come with us. And I was like, this is great because otherwise we wouldn't have this expertise. It's a rich expertise. And we kept in communication and talking. And one of the things that the Florence Project indicated is, look, we want access to some humanitarian parole issues, which have actually become more pressing in light of changes or possible changes to asylum. And so we worked collaboratively, really under the leadership of the Florence Project, because we want to follow their lead and do what they tell us to do, right? Kind of like the same thing when people are calling our office from Martha's Vineyard, want you to do this, and then you do it. And so eventually that FOIA work, that project of FOIA requests became a federal litigation that we actually just filed together. And so that was a really wonderful collaboration that started right here in Tucson a year and a half ago when I visited last. And so that's been a really wonderful arc to see my visit produce such a wonderful collaboration and friendships too. And so I've been blessed with that, and I have Professor Marcus to thank for that, and the law school to thank for that, for shepherding us together and keeping us together and all of that. And so the humanitarian parole lawsuit is going to be, I think, really interesting to follow, because the lawsuit was designed to find out what is the process of approving humanitarian parole. And without clarity, I mean, how do we take advantage of it as providers for affected individuals? And so the records are designed to shed light on that, and I hope will be extraordinarily useful for not just the Florence Project, but for other folks that can avail themselves of that. And I think that's huge for what's coming down the pipe, which is, as the Biden administration has said, more changes, or I should say restrictions to asylum. As we've seen also potentially the return of more detention policies, an over-reliance on detention again. And so that's kind of like what we see as coming down the pipe. And the Florence Project has brought us along for the ride as we continue to figure out some of these pieces, and as we all do as practitioners in this space.
Well, we look forward to seeing the arc of what comes from your visit this time, next time, and the outcome of all of this litigation. And thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Professor.